welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some good networking and made some new, built some new relationships and rekindled old ones. But of course, it's time to get into our next session this hour. And the subject, of course, is the role of modern telematics, making businesses more efficient, safer, and greener. And our guest speaker is, of course, Francois Stols, who is the Netstar Principal Technology Consultant. Incredible background, highly knowledgeable, and of course, Francois is going to give us some key insights into this highly interesting topic. So, Francois, if you can join me on stage.
Thanks for that welcome.
Hi, Francois. Good to meet. And I've read your bio, and I think you've had, well, not no, I know you've had an amazing journey in the technology area. Francois, a bit about your history, if you can give 2 seconds, if you can.
Yeah, sort of, Mike. I've been always involved in technology in one form or the other, but I think there's sort of in the last 2 decades, very heavy focus initially in the multimedia space. I founded and managed a company that developed the first DSTV decoder for MultiChoice, and then I joined Netstar as the Chief Technical Officer, and just sort of recently retired as a full-time job, but I'm still acting as a consultant for them. So that's it in a nutshell. Mike.
Fantastic. Well done. Yeah, I know you were in, of course, multimedia, and of course, I saw your profile on DSTV in that amazing invention, and of course, your founding of that business. And I know you've got some great insights to share this morning, Francois. Yeah, so I think we've got a presentation that's going to be uploaded, and I know I've got a few questions coming through, which I'll, of course, after certain slides, I'll just bring up some questions, Francois, and then I'm also going to ask our attendees out there. Francois has got a wealth of knowledge, and if there's anything that you'd like him to answer, you can pop it into the chat, and we know that the chat rolls quite quickly, but if we don't get to answer your questions, then of course we will come back to you on that. Yeah, Francois, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and I'll try and keep it as interactive as I can. The intention is not to bore you with a slide presentation, so maybe if I can just on the next slide sort of give an indication of what we're planning to cover here. I think I thought I'll just start off by giving a little bit of an overview of the vehicle base in the sort of small to medium-sized enterprises, and then give a little bit of an overview of the history of telematics, what it's all about, and where did it start, and then maybe also where it's heading. And then more specifically in the SMB space, I want to talk a little bit around some of the challenges that's facing our small fleets out there, and what this technology can do to help them solve some of those problems. And then I'll also just touch on 1 or 2 of the macro challenges facing our country, and what telematics can do when we are faced with these macro challenges, like COVID recently and elections and so on. And then lastly, the most exciting stuff, always leaving it for last. I'll try and provide a bit of a glimpse into the future. Where is this sort of technology heading, and what does the future hold for us? So if you're happy that I could proceed, then I think let's move on to the next slide. And thanks, Mike. So Mike, this is really statistics that was based on a study that was done by your own organization that we had privileged to see, and it was quite an interesting study. More than 23,000 customers out of a base of 750,000 customers in the sort of SMB space were interrogated. And what this shows, interestingly enough, is of that base, there are 35,000 vehicles in fleets of less than 15 per fleet. So if you extrapolate that out over the whole 750,000 base, it means that the vehicle park in the SMB space could be as much as 3.6 million vehicles. Now, that's a significant number of vehicles, but I think sadly, if you look at this, the sort of penetration of telematics type of technology into that space, we see that it's only about 20% penetrated. And if you compare that, for example, sake with the sort of consumer space, where we see a penetration of 37%, and in the large enterprise or large fleet space, a penetration of 63%. I think one can conclude that this segment is most probably a little bit underserviced by technology. I don't know if you would agree with that, Mike.
Oh, absolutely. And just on that side, why do you think the penetration is so much lower within the SME sector compared to the other segments?
Yeah, Mike, I think if you look at the consumer segment, it was very, very driven by stolen vehicle recovery, and the insurance industry, of course, drove that very, very hard. And I think that's why you see the high penetration there. But if you look at the large enterprise fleet, I think the technology used to be expensive and it used to be complicated, and it was only affordable by the large enterprises. But also the large enterprises really embraced the technology to help them to manage the efficiency and the cost of their fleets, where the cost, of course, is a significant part of their operation. So I think, but with the technology now becoming more affordable and more within the reach of the smaller businesses, I think it is something that smaller businesses should look at.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So just moving on from there, then. If I could just give a quick little brief history of where did the technology start and where we are today. I think the technology really started about 25, maybe a little bit longer years ago. But it's very, very simple devices in the vehicle. These were basically radio frequency devices, and their only capability was to sort of locate the vehicle using very sophisticated tracking equipment in the recovery vehicles, whether it's helicopter, ground vehicles, and so on. So not a lot of intelligence, and very focused around just the recovery of the vehicle. But I think sort of 20 years ago, GSM, or global satellite technology, and GSM technology sort of combined and became more affordable, and these technologies found its way into the devices, and suddenly we could put a dot on a map. And I think putting a dot on a map then sort of led to the ability to offer more services. Suddenly we could start generating historical reports of where vehicles were moving, and then my apologies. We could also start integrating this sort of, let's call it geospatial information into other systems within the fleet environment, the route planning systems and the ERP systems and the HR systems, so that they can get a more holistic view of the cost of their fleet and how their fleet is being operated. So that was very exciting. And then 10 years ago, most probably even a little bit more, we started seeing additional sensors being fitted to these telematics devices, that now suddenly we could measure the driver behavior, how he's driving his vehicles, harsh acceleration, cornering, and so on. And suddenly the insurance companies realized that they can use this to manage the risk of their books better. And we saw worldwide an explosion of sort of pay as you drive and pay how you drive kind of business models around the insurance industry. South Africa most probably not the only one, but the most well-known one is most probably Discovery's Vitality Drive, but that's still ongoing, and it's becoming bigger and bigger in the rest of the world as well. And then sort of 5 years ago, cheaper storage and more compute power and more developments in the sort of cloud architecture made it possible now to launch big data models. And that again, allowed even richer experiences to be made available to customers. And I'll circle back to that a little bit later in my talk. But where we are now, a lot of focus on safety and security again, especially after the unrest and so on, but a lot of focus also around cargo security and so on. And then as far as technology concerned, a lot of focus around video technology and IoT. But Mike, I'll talk about these a little bit more, but I don't know if there's any questions. By the way, I can't see the participants' questions. So if you have anything, just
I've got one here. I've got one here. Francois, is South Africa considered a global leading technology provider in this space?
Absolutely, Mike, and I almost want to say sadly so, because I think we had a unique situation that vehicle security was a big issue in South Africa. It's not unique to South Africa. I see one sees those kind of things in places like Brazil and so on as well. But I think need is the mother of invention, and I think this technologies was born out of a need, to secure our vehicles. And that then led to more advanced technology. So right now, most of the telematics players, or the big telematics players in South Africa, operates globally, and some of them are recognized as global leaders. And underlying to that, the technology was locally developed as well.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So where are we heading? I think if we look at the next slide, I think we need to start before we decide where the technology is heading. We need to just look at where's the value proposition, if I can call it that, the heading. So I already mentioned that the technology really started with dots on a map. In other words, where's my vehicle, which led to sort of historical reports. What was my fleet doing? And I mentioned that sort of rolled into operational planning or scheduling. And as more and more data became available, business intelligence became possible. And where we now we're at that sort of crossing point where we're now starting to move into predictive analytics. In other words, how I should be using my fleet, and finally into vehicle autonomy. But I'm going to touch on that towards the end of the presentation in more detail. But for now, if you look at this sort of value proposition evolution, what is driving that? I already mentioned big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning has become buzzwords, but they're more than just buzzwords. There was a joke that the best code that was ever written for AI was PowerPoint, but we've moved beyond that. We now actually have real AI out there, and it's very exciting stuff. And then video analytics is starting to play a very, very dominant role. The whole sort of IoT explosion is also found its way into mobility and vehicles. And then edge computing, the ability to actually put very powerful processing capability in the vehicle itself, is transforming the way that telematics is working. And then lastly, data enrichment. I think it is now possible to pull in sources or data sources from places that was unheard of previously. And if I can just give a small example of that, if there's unrest taking place somewhere, the best place to find out about unrest is most probably the social media. So there's now sort of automated processes that will pull that sentiment in, make it available to us, and we can then overlay it with our own telematics data and advise customers, to avoid certain areas and so on. So that's really the direction that we're heading, but I'll unpack that in a little bit more detail, Mike.
Yes. And Francois, big data has become a bit of a buzzword. And what exactly does this mean in your industry?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking that question, Mike. Yeah, so so when we started dabbling in telematics, we didn't have a lot of data, but as our base grew, and also as the reporting frequency grew, the data became so big that we actually couldn't store it. It was just too expensive to store it. So at that stage, we were ingesting, was probably about 5 to 10 million data points a day, and we couldn't store it. So we would sort of process it into a report or show it live on a map and then throw it away. But I think as the big data technologies became available, suddenly we could keep all of the data all of the time, and we could keep lots more data with higher granularity. So, coming from sort of 5 to 10 million data points a day, we're now already over 300 million data points a day, and growing exponentially. Okay, Mike. Yeah. So I thought in my next section, I really want us to have a bit of a conversation around the sort of benefits of this kind of technologies in small fleets and small business operations. So I thought, what better way, just to look at some of the challenges that is facing these customers. So just moving on to the next slide, I thought, let me just start off with driver safety and vehicle safety. And I think if you look at that sort of infographic on the right-hand side, we see a huge increase in hijacking of not only commercial vehicles, but consumer vehicles as well. And how can the technology then assist you to overcome some of those problems? Yeah, so I think the first thing is situational awareness, knowing where your drivers are, knowing where your vehicles are, you can manage it better. Also, from a driver safety point of view, knowing how your drivers are driving the vehicles can help you manage that situation. And then having response services in place, there's a multitude of them, including stolen vehicle recovery companies, roadside assist companies. Dash cams are starting to play a big role in trying to assure the safety of your driver and your vehicle. And as I said, the space of predictive analytics, hopefully we can keep you out of trouble so that you don't end up in a situation where your safety is compromised. So, Mike, I'm going to share a case study with you, but I don't know if there's any questions just before I share the case study.
Francois, there is one. I mean, I'm not sure
Yes.
if this is the right question at this point, but why do you think there's such an increase in car and truck hijacking?
Yeah, so Mike, again, interestingly enough, it's if we talk about cars, it is becoming increasingly more difficult to steal a car. I think over the years, the car manufacturers has increased the vehicle security systems built into the vehicles quite significantly, and we find that the modus operandi of car thieves these days is rather to hijack the vehicle, because then they know that the vehicle is mobile, and they can move it to a place where they can then strip it or deal whatever. So I think the modus operandi in cars is really around the ability to steal the vehicle, because it's so difficult. But if you look at the commercial space, it's a little bit different. They typically after the cargo, especially bigger trucks these days carry flat screen televisions, they carry tobacco, they carry liquor, of freight of great value. So again, that's what's driving the sort of increase and I think that's also why in the commercial space, the hijacking is much higher.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay. Yeah, so the specific case study that I wanted to share with you people is we did a sort of an interesting little deep dive into the data, and we took one of our insurance companies, we took 40,000 of their vehicles over a 5-year period, and we looked at the sort of the data set, and we overlaid it with their own claims records, and we tried to make sense of what the data is telling us, and we actually came out with enormously interesting data, far too vast to share in this forum. But the one statistics that I just wanted to highlight, there's this old adage that speed kills. And I think what we did in this particular, we had a look and we looked at the actual road speed in a specific area, and whether the driver was exceeding the speed limit in that specific area when he had an accident. And quite interestingly enough, we saw that most of the accidents occurred where people were exceeding the 100 km/h speed limit. Also fairly at the sort of 80 to 100 kilometers, but also the 60 kilometers limits, but the lower limits, the sort of 30 and 40 kilometer limits, if they exceeded that, it didn't really lead to any serious incidents or accidents. And similarly, and surprisingly, on the 120 kilometer side of it, we also didn't see that many accidents. We're not talking about the severity of the accidents, we talk about the number of sort of serious accidents. And as an aside, we also really saw in our data, because the telematics also tells us when the vehicles were driving, what time of day, etc. And we saw that up to 73% of the accidents occur late at night, which is very interesting statistics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, Mike, if there's nothing from your side, I'm happy to move on to the next slide.
I've got one point, and we've been quite involved with it. The past few years, of course, POPI has become a big thing. And are there not some privacy and POPI concerns using data to do such analysis at this?
Yeah, Mike, it's always a sensitive issue. I think what we do is first of all, we get the consent from our customers that we can share their data, and it's more specifically who we can share their data with. But when we do an analysis like this, we completely anonymize and randomize the data. So there's no chance of trying to or seeing specific vehicle information. It's all to do with anonymized data. But yes, I think POPI will be a big issue going forward, and we need to manage, because on the one hand, data is an enormously valuable tool, but on the other hand, I think people's privacy is equally important. So it will always be a balance going into the future.
Sure. Thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah. So Leanne, if we can move on to the next slide. I want to move more sort of towards the security aspect and cargo security more specifically. And again, I thought let's just start off with a little bit of statistics. So I think we took our telematics data and we overlaid it with data that we got from the police. If the statistics from the police have what they term high vehicle crime precincts, and so what we saw is there was a marked increase in the number of trips that ends up in these high vehicle crime precincts from 2020 I think it was from 2020 to 20 sorry, Mike, I'm just on the wrong slide here. Just give me half a second. Yeah, so we saw an increase of trips ending in high vehicle crime zones, and that then also sort of matched what we saw in terms of the number of hijacks. And then we saw that going down during COVID, initially to the point where there were actually no hijacks or no vehicle thefts in the early days of COVID, in those first 3 days of the 5-day hard lockdown. But we're back to the sort of levels of where it was before. And if we just move on to the next slide. Yeah, sorry, this was the slide I was looking for. Yeah, so between 2018 and 2019, you can see that sharp increase, but then it decreased again, the number of trips ending in high crime zones. But what we did see is the number of incidents increased quite dramatically. So yeah, so it is something that we're keeping an eye on, Mike, and we're applying a lot of technology in this space to try and provide more vehicle security, including sort of tracking your trailers, and not only the vehicle itself, and also starting to put tracking devices in the cargo. We're hiding tracking units, for example, like in cartons of cigarettes. We're hiding it in some cases, even in store. We would put a tracking device in a bubble wrap that is hanging on the rack, disguised to look like a cell phone, so that if there is any crime taking place, we can still recover the goods.
Okay. Well, Francois, it seems truck looting during unrest and industrial actions has also become more frequent. What can technology do to reduce these risks?
Yeah, Mike, I think unrest is so unpredictable. You can't really predict when it's going to take place and where it's going to take place. So we're very dependent on sort of bureau services providing advice to our customers based on the sort of story that our telematics supplemented with what we pick up from the social media. So typically not only our company, but the telematics companies typically would have a bureau service where they sort of monitor what is happening in the sort of social media space, and then we advise our customers accordingly to try and avoid these spaces.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, yeah, so I think everybody is interested in the rands and cents. How can I use technology to save me money? So I think first of all, just starting off with if you know where your vehicles are and your drivers are, if you've got a small business and you're delivering goods, or if you're a small construction company, knowing that your workers has arrived on site and so on, will lead to a better customer experience. But also, if your vehicle is being driven properly, it will save you on maintenance costs, it will save you on fuel costs. And then, of course, if you also know who's been driving your vehicle, you can do better driver debriefing, you can do better driver training if you do see some behavior that requires training. And then lastly, but not leastly, having a look at, how often are your vehicles actually on the move, how often are they parked, when they park, are they parked while idling, or is the ignition switched off, and so on. All of those sort of reports can give you an indication whether your fleet is right size, if you've got too many vehicles. So all of this sort of adds together in giving you the ability to manage the finances around your vehicles a little bit better. So I've got some statistics here, which is quite interesting. If you look at that little blue block on the right-hand side, this is from a customer, Patco. They have fitted all of their buses with quite extensive telematics. And this was a statement made by their fleet manager, where he basically saying that, they've seen a reduction of 70% in accidents and 36% reduction in claims. And similarly, we see where people use this technology that they can reduce their fuel bill by as much as 10 to 15%. So significant savings possible using this kind of technology, Mike.
Okay, that's all important to the SME sector.
100%. Yeah, so Mike, maybe just touching also what is happening in our country a little bit. If we could just move on 2 slides. Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about this particular infographic. I think this is something that's hurting us all. And I'm going to talk even less about the colored bar, but it's at the bottom, sort of all the sort of rates and taxes and so on that's going up in fuel. But I think what I wanted to highlight is, that the fuel price over the last 10 years has almost doubled. It's increased 84%. And this is not going to get better. I think with all the problems that we're seeing in the world at the moment, and fuel price, crude oil prices rising, fuel is going to be a major element in our lives going forward. So just moving on to the next slide. What can telematics do to help you manage your fuel costs better? I think I've already touched on a lot of it, but if I can just highlight the specifics. So the foremost element that you want to manage is the way that your vehicle is being driven, and telematics give you some ability to manage that. We talk about RAG reports or red, amber, green reports. So this is where the telematics is used to help guide the driver, for example's sake, to make sure that he drives within a certain parameter when it comes to the RPM of his vehicle, in other words, gear changes, speed, etc. So you set a number of parameters, and then we monitor to make sure that the driver stays within those parameters. And if he's not, we give him instantaneous feedback so that he can change his behavior. Of course, reducing idle time is a biggie. We find in winter people run their engines to keep the car warm. In summer, they run the engine to run the air conditioners when it's hot. So that is a big obvious one that you can monitor through telematics. And then speed limiters is an interesting one. 10 years ago, speed limiters, or 10, 15 years ago, speed limiters came on the scene. But the problem with speed limiters in those days is you could only set it to a certain limit. So, if it was set to 100 kilometers an hour and you were in a 120 kilometer zone, then the speed limiter was actually a little bit useless. But now with modern technology, there's so much processing power and storage capacity, electronic storage capacity in the devices, that we can download the map data to the device, and the map data contains the road segment speed limits. So the speed limiters will automatically adapt to the speed of the road on that particular segment. And the next big thing that we're working on now is to actually link that to the camera system, so that even where you have a temporary speed limit, it will read the road sign and it will adjust the speed limiter accordingly. So very exciting stuff happening there. And last but not least, managing fuel theft. I think telematics can be used. We can measure the actual fuel usage and compare it to your monthly billing reports. We can have cameras facing your fuel cap and set up alerts if somebody is tampering with your fuel. There's mechanical devices that links to telematics, etc. So a lot can be done around managing fuel theft, Mike.
Fantastic. Just on that, of course, expenses and costs right now, and like you say, with the conflict, Russia, Ukraine, it's not going to do good for the fuel prices of the future. But which of these technology elements have the largest effect on fuel savings?
Yeah, Mike, I think without a shadow of a doubt, your driving behavior, and that's why most telematics companies offer driver behavior monitoring as one of the sort of core products in there. But I think hot on its heels, of course, is things like idling and so on. But I think driver behavior is where small fleets should focus. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Okay, and then sort of leading on from fuel is carbon. I think everybody these days, is thinking green and is thinking how we can save our environment and how we can behave as better citizens to avoid global warming. And of course, unfortunately, there's a direct relationship between burning fuel and emitting CO2. So I think the first point to make is, as you're saving fuel, you're saving CO2 as well. I think the first thing is to focus on fuel savings, and that will help you reduce your CO2 emissions. But where telematics can also help, and it's not such a big thing in this country yet, but it will happen. But internationally, you now have to submit reports what your actual carbon emissions were. So we can generate through telematics your carbon emissions reports. And then also more excitingly, where there are pressures, and again, it's not those pressures are starting to come in South Africa, but where there are pressures for businesses to be carbon neutral. Of course, running a fleet, you can't be carbon neutral, so you have to sort of purchase carbon credits. So there are facilities where you can do carbon trading, and a lot of telematics companies would use your telematics data to advise you and also to help you to do the necessary carbon trading to keep your fleet carbon neutral.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, so Mike, anything before I move on?
All good, Francois, all good.
All good, okay, yeah. Okay, and then lastly in this section, maybe talking a little bit around road safety. I think we're all very, very concerned. If you look at that graph on the right-hand side, the exponential rise so I think we want to make our roads safe, and I think telematics is a big player in that space, especially around driver behavior. And I think first of all, you as an owner of a fleet can manage the behavior of your driver. We through telematics can tell you how your driver is driving. But I think equally exciting, third parties are starting to offer incentives for better driving behavior. Again, the fatality drive is a good example of that. And then, of course, better route planning, and eventually when auto comes about, the ability to manage your auto environment a little bit better as well. All of these will lead to better road safety, Mike. Okay, and then moving on to the last slide, very, very interesting stuff. I think, when there's a national event of national importance, again, having this amount of data, you can get some interesting insights. And of course, during COVID, everybody was very, very interested in what was happening out there. And again, we did many, many insights, which we shared on the media, television and radio and so on. But, I just gave you one example here. If you look at that graph on the right-hand side, what we did here is we had a look at a specific period. I think it was December 2020 to July 2021. Visits to hospitals. So we can see, vehicles that start their trip at home and they end their trip at the hospital. So you can see from December how the number of visits to hospital has declined in all three provinces. The number of visits to the hospital, obviously in GP was the greatest, or Gauteng was the greatest, KwaZulu next, and Western Cape least. But I think that's most probably to do with the population density in those areas. But quite interesting down below is the distance that cars had to travel to get to those hospitals. So if you look at Gauteng, the significantly longer distances that they had to travel to get to hospitals compared to Western Cape. So obviously, because of the geographical spread in those provinces, it's not easy for people to get to hospitals. So I think this is also an interesting little insight. I think the second example that I gave there was during the elections. Again, the media asked us lots of questions. Can we see what the people are doing during elections? And I think the first thing that we saw there is that at least 51% of the vehicle base did get to polling stations. That doesn't mean that other people didn't vote. They must probably just walk there. But what was interesting is, throughout the province, most people traveled an average of about 6 kilometers to get to a polling station, which I guess is credit to the organizers, because if you look at the sort of footprint throughout the whole country, nobody had to drive significantly further than 6 kilometers to get to a polling point, which was quite an interesting statistic. The other thing that the media asked us, our president gave us the day off to go and vote. Would people treat this as a long holiday? And surprisingly enough, people did not. When we had a look at how many trips started at home and went on long trips, we saw that only about 4.5 to 5% of people actually took a long holiday that weekend. I think the one example that I give you is in the Northwest present, 4.5% of the vehicles actually left the province. So yeah, kudos to our voters.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Mike, I'm going to finish my talk with a little bit of a glimpse into the future. So first of all, I spoke a lot on the next slide around the predictive analytics. So predictive analytics is actually very exciting. I think now that we have big data and we have artificial intelligence and we have machine learning, we can bring all of that to bear and start answering different questions for our customers. So our customers are saying, don't tell me my driver had an accident, like you are at the moment. Tell me that he will have an accident, that if he doesn't change his driver behavior, or if I don't take him off the road, he's likely to have an accident, because you can see he's driving erratically, he's tired or something, And similarly, don't tell me where my vehicles has been. Don't give me my trip reports of the past. Tell me where my vehicle should be. How should I deploy my vehicle during a specific phase of the of my business. And then lastly, also don't tell me just what my fleet is costing me. I know that already from the stuff that you've given me, but tell me, how can I save money going into the future? And on this, there's a lot of emphasis on this last point. This is just a simple example where we took some data for a vehicle manufacturer, and from looking at how those vehicles, that sample of vehicles was being driven, we can predict when the next service will be due. We can predict when that customer is likely to come out of warranty. And then just moving on to the next slide, we could even predict which is the best, looking at where those customers do travel compared to the dealerships. We could predict which will be the best dealership to service that customer. So this is all valuable information for a business like a service station, but we're seeing lots more in this space happening into the future. I don't know if you have any questions on that, Mike.
I do, Francois. Being able to predict events will be a great tool to fleet operators. But how close are we being able to do that?
Yeah, I think, Mike, we're already starting to see that happening. I gave this example of sort of predictive analytics around warranty and so on, but you can take it one step further. We're running a POC at the moment where we can start telling a consumer or small business owner, if you change, we can see the way that you, for example, like accelerating and braking your vehicle, or decelerating your vehicle. If you change your behavior, and we can give him guidance what the changes he needs to make, your brake pads will last another 7,000 kilometers compared to another 2,000 kilometers, and that equates to a saving of X. So this kind of things is real. It's starting to happen, and I think you will see these technologies becoming available to the marketplace in the very near future.
Thank you.
Yeah, so on the next slide, I make the point, that data is the new oil. Everybody is talking about the new oil being data, and it's not only in our industry, it's everywhere. But if you look at that quote in the little block in the blue, in the blue block, that it just sort of stresses again that on a global basis, people are saying that big data will enable the technologies to evolve, not only from a pure risk management point of view, but also to a risk prediction and a risk prevention point of view. And that's really what we're also starting to see. And I think the sort of owners of big data can't sit on that data, because your own data is not as valuable as the data that's enriched with data sources from elsewhere. So sort of data as a service is becoming the buzzword with all owners of big data, and making data available to others so that they can build that they can build products on top of that. And again, I'm going to give an example that's most probably relevant to this audience. What we found is sharing our data with a data provider that has information on where retail stores are, and et cetera, et cetera. We could determine during COVID how people's loyalty has changed. They used to travel to a big shopping center to do their shopping. They're now doing their shopping at the local shopping center. And post-COVID, that behavior continued. So you can start seeing retail behavior. You can start seeing lots of interesting information if you start using your data in conjunction with other people's data. And that's why we coined the phrase data as a service. Because I think it is going to be a service that will be consumed by more than just telematics companies.
Yeah. Francois, just on that, other than fleet operators and insurance companies, who will have an interest in this type of data?
Well, Mike, I already mentioned that certainly the retail industry is showing a great interest in that, but we're starting to see even banks having an interest in this data. They want to build products of value. We know where vehicles are traveling, which areas they're traveling through, the LSMs that they're living in, and so on. So yeah, I think it won't be restricted just to telematics companies. It will be banks, it will be insurance companies, it will be retail, and government road planners, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, and then my sort of second last slide is around video and AI analytics. A very, very interesting space. There's statistics that infographics shows that more than 90% of accidents are usually caused by the driver. And if you could keep the driver safe, then of course you can reduce accidents dramatically. And we already saw that in the example with Putco. Incidentally, all the Putco buses has got the extensive camera systems in addition to normal vehicle telematics on them. But the point I was really going to make is with all the sort of edge capability that we now have, very, very, very powerful processors in the vehicle itself, we can now in real time determine whether this through the video analytics, determine whether the driver has got his safety belt on, or has he got both his hands on the steering wheel, is he talking on his cell phone while driving, is he fatigued. We can monitor his facial expressions and determine whether he's fatigued and so on, and give him instantaneous feedback. You need to get off the road to rest, or etc., etc. So I think lots of interesting stuff happening in that space. And Mike, we see this technology really taking off in the near future as it's becoming more and more affordable, even in private vehicles and small businesses.
Sure. Thank you for that.
Okay, and then lastly, Mike, the question on everybody's lips is when will the driver disappear? Most probably not in my lifetime. But like all things, it's a journey. It's not an event. So I think a lot of underlying technology is already on the road. To autonomous vehicles. The one case study that I want to use here is on mines, for example, like these massive big trucks. They can't see pedestrians and smaller vehicles and so on. So they all kitted out by law with telematic systems. And these telematic systems will warn the big truck driver if there's a collision imminent, and if he does not take evasive action, it will actually take over the systems of the vehicle and on behalf of the driver take the necessary evasive action. So, and you also have things like park assist now coming into play. You have advanced driver assistance systems being fitted to vehicles and so on. So all of these things is starting to automate certain aspects of your driving experience, but most probably still a while before you'll see driverless vehicles. I think the one exception is where we already seeing that in a lot of experimentation happening in what they call truck trains, where you have several trucks in tandem, where they linked with telematics, and the truck in the front will determine how to accelerate, how to slow down, etc., and all of that gets sent to the subsequent vehicle via telematics. But yeah, I think again, big data is the sort of major enabler in this space. You need to, for you to be able to have an autonomous vehicle on an open road, you need to know exactly, what that road segment looks like, what the camber looks like. what is the safe speed for that corner, and then overlay it with the traffic data, and overlay it with the weather data. A wet road, the speed, the safe speed around the corner might be different. So an enormous amount of data has to come together, and all of this needs to be available in real time with good connectivity, not my connectivity like you saw now. You can't afford to lose connectivity in an autonomous vehicle. But we see, with the 5G rollout and various other things happening, this sort of connectivity, pervasive connectivity is becoming real. So, yeah, so mark the space, but it's not going to happen tomorrow, Mike.
Absolutely. That's interesting. I mean, it's, we've seen touches on this all over, but it's kind of hard to believe, but of course it's coming.
It's coming. Yeah, so Mark, that sort of concludes my talk. I don't know if there's more questions from the audience and so on.
Francois, I want to tell you, Francois Stols, who's of course the Principal Technology Consultant for Netstar. These incredible insights that you have given us, we don't usually hear and see, and but for me, it's extremely life-changing, cost-saving, and when you think about telematics, many of us don't really know deep inside all these insights the way you've demonstrated. So extremely invaluable, and we really are truly grateful. We do know that vehicles and vehicle fleets in the SME environment is just at the top of the pile. And so thank you for your time. We're truly grateful.
And thank you to your audience as well, Mark. It was an absolute pleasure for me and a privilege for me as well to share some of this with you.
Thank you very much. All the very best to you. Take care.